Welcome to episode 6 of Shadows and Storylines. Once again, I'm Pelham Pugh. I hope we make it through this recording without having to stop. We've got storms rolling through the area today. Strange day in January. I looked out of the window a while ago. It was really foggy and it's still kind of cool, but they're talking about maybe tornadic activity today. So we'll go ahead and try to get this episode in. And what I wanted to talk about today was Perfidious Tides, what made me write the book, or the start of writing the book. I had no intentions of writing what I wrote, if that makes any sense. But I'll tell you, it all started with someone asking me to help them. I had somebody contact me and they were writing a memoir to leave to their sons. And as he wrote, he would send me a copy and I would look through it, polish it up a little bit, format it a little bit. And I found out I enjoyed doing that. And I started thinking about, maybe trying again, maybe trying to write a book. I've tried several times and something always happened where I'd lose interest or something else would transpire and I leave it by the wayside. I had the beginnings of a book that I started writing, I guess in my early 20s, maybe late teens, early 20s. I still have a copy of the manuscript, and one day maybe I'll revisit it. As I was reading it, I was thinking, you can do a lot better than this. And as I sat down on my computer, it was in the summertime, so I was off work. I wasn't coaching that summer, so I had plenty of time. And I started thinking about brothers. And, the bonds of having a brother. I don't have a brother, I have a sister. And I've never known the bonds of having a brother. Other than my double first cousin, he's like a little brother to me, I guess. Because we grew up, within 3 or 4 miles of each other, and he was 6 years younger than me, but he was always like a little brother to me, and I guess in some ways I still feel that way. But I started thinking about brothers, and I'll be honest with you, I started thinking about Dallas, the old TV show, Bobby and JR, and I started thinking about two brothers competing over a business. And I started writing, and let me preface this episode before we go any further. If you don't want any spoilers, I'm going to try not to spoil anything in the books, but it's going to be kind of hard to talk about writing the book and not adding anything that might spoil something. So if you want to stop now and go ahead, read the books, come back. I've got plenty of other content out there you can kind of explore, but I would really like for you to read the books and already have read all 3, Perfidious Tides, Last Castle in the Sky, and Live the Last Day by the time you read this, or listen to this. So I won't be spoiling anything, and I'm not going to worry about spoiling anything because you have been forewarned. But anyway, as I started writing, that was on my mind. But I love music. I love hard rock, heavy metal music. I know that sounds kind of strange with my accent, but I love that kind of music. And I was listening to a song by System of a Down called BYOB as I started writing. I listened to the song over and over again, and it has this line that, why don't presidents fight the war? Why do they always send the poor? And that just kept gnawing at me as I started thinking about writing. And when I sat down, I wanted to write something about the Vietnam War. I know that song wasn't about the Vietnam War, but I'm very interested in the failures that was Vietnam. And we can sit here and debate whether it was a failure or not, but after we left and pulled our troops out, it was immediate. The North took over the South, and every life that was lost in Vietnam was for nothing. And you can disagree with me, that's fine. But like I said, I'm a trained historian. I've got a degree in history, and I've done a lot of reading, a lot of studying, because that war really affected this nation in the negative way, and it still lingers today. And that line, "Why don't presidents fight the war? Why do they always send the poor?" got me thinking about people who were drafted. And my family has never been rich. We've never had a lot of money. My father dropped out of school, and he was drafted, I think, around 1967, 1968, into the Army. And it got me thinking about other, like, famous people, I'm not gonna name any names, that got out of it, never had to serve, but yet there was my father from Podunk, Alabama, poor as dirt. He didn't have a chance. I mean, they scooped him up immediately. And then I started thinking about the process, and I started digging into the process of the draft and how the draft boards chose and who got selected, who didn't. And it really bothered me, and it still bothers me today. The corruption that had to be evident or present in that process. I'm as true blue American as anybody else, but I call out our faults when I see them. And I think that was a big fault that we're still paying for. A lot of these guys from Vietnam are just like other veterans. They don't like to speak about what happened over there. And I don't blame them one bit. I don't blame them for anything that happened, anything they did. They didn't ask to be there. So that was on my mind as I began writing Perfidious Tides. And something happened. I can't really explain how I wrote Perfidious Tides. It's a blur right now. But it wrote itself. As I started writing, it's like the story poured out of my fingertips onto the keyboard. I had really, honestly, no control over it. I just remember writing and the story evolving as I went. I had none of it planned. Well, actually, I did have it planned, like I said, with something like Dallas and two brothers competing over a business, and it's spanning decades and generations. And I had aspirations of going back in time and adding, their ancestors to the story, but that's not the way the book or the story wanted to be told. And I'm telling you, as I was writing that story, that's exactly what happened. It had a mind of its own. And I know that sounds strange, and the term organic is used a lot in writing. And I heard one of my favorite TV writers who wrote Sons of Anarchy. He talked about everything being organic. It had to be organic. And I never really understood that, and I got tired of hearing him say that. And when Kurt Sutter, that's the guy who wrote it, kept saying that, and when I started writing, I immediately understood what he was talking about. The story told itself. The story throughout the 3 books had continually told itself. I've had little direction over it. Now, the names, I went back and researched that era and found names that were highly likely to be used or for children born of certain eras. I wanted it to not be a historical novel, but to use history to guide it along. And I think I did a pretty good job of that, adding little facts here and there. But as I started writing, and that song kept playing over and over again in my head, the Bruce brothers morphed from 2 brothers fighting over a company to 2 brothers that really had been manipulated. I have a hard time saying that word, manipulated by others, tearing them apart. I mean, and we see in that very first chapter, and like I said, spoilers ahead, in that very first chapter, I went back and rewrote that chapter. The second chapter in the first few versions of the novel opened the book. And I thought we needed a scene beforehand. So I went back and I wrote chapter 1 that kind of got us along. And we see that draft board in action and the callousness of some of them, the indifference of some of those members, the manipulative, like like Mac. I mean, he was very manipulative. Like I said, I went back and I wrote that first chapter, and I'm glad I did because it kind of brings us full circle when you read the whole thing about Mac Tate's involvement, why he did what he did, and the ripple effect that it took amongst, a couple of generations of their family. And I'm not going to get deep into spoilers, but we'll see later on why Mac Tate did what he did and why he was like the puppet master pulling the strings of those. And that one person stood up, and we see what happened to him. Very quickly, we see. And I wanted to kind of draw back a little bit right quick and talk about my thoughts on characters, protagonists, antagonists, the good guys, the bad guys. I don't believe in happy endings. I really don't. I don't believe in fairy tale endings. That's not real life. Real life happens as it happens. Some are good endings, some are happy endings. Most of the time, the endings in real life leave you wondering, what really just happened? And as it goes to bad guys and good guys, there's a gray area that I think every single person in the world has. I think you start off in that gray area. And sometimes you move to one side, the darker side, and not to use Star Wars analogies, and sometimes you move to the lighter side. Sometimes you're on the better side of it. Sometimes you're on the worse. I don't believe anybody's truly evil. I don't believe anybody's truly good, per se. I believe there's that mix in every person. There's that streak of meanness in even the kindest person. And even in the most hateful, devilish person in the world, there's a conscience buried in there somewhere. And in these three books, I like to explore that, and you'll notice characters drifting from side to side, kind of in the middle. Sometimes they're over here, sometimes they're over there. But there's nobody truly evil. There's nobody truly good. You never really know where somebody's going to land. And that has kind of guided my writing through these three books. But getting back to Perfidious Tides a little bit, once the two brothers have that wedge, that's always been kind of festering right there because maybe their father favored one over the other just slightly. And we dig into that deeper into the second and third books, really. But after that wedge is drawn right there, after that valley deepens between Vern and Roth, it doesn't stop with them. And we'll see in further books, Casey and Cliff are young in the first book. But as we go into the second book, they're growing, they're getting older, and we see that rift in them. And then we see sides. Then we see things happening to them because of that one act of that one draft board. And for a long time, we see Vern toting that guilt with him along through his life. And it never really leaves. And it really affects his personal relationships with his own family, even though we say that was manipulated. And we see eventually, we know Roth in the first book, in Perfidious Tides, and I'll leave it at that, we don't really know his fate. We know he may have survived. There's pictures, there's stories. Colonel Dye, comes into the picture and he tells us some things. And we learn that things may not be what they seem. And that kind of drives Vern a little bit further. And you see in the first book, and it really focuses on Vern's struggles. Vern in that campaign, he knows if he does A, B, and C, it will lead to his election. And we don't know how that would affect the rest of his life, and maybe Rolf's life, and the children's lives, his wife's life. And we don't No, but there's this streak in Vern where he wants to do the right thing. And that streak wins out, and we see how that streak winning out of drifting over to the good part of his consciousness, I guess, or the braver part, how it sends him on this path. And there's no turning back once he makes that decision, and it affects lives as it ripples through. And I hope this is making sense. I mean, this is really the first time I've talked about Perfidious Tides and writing the books. But it all goes back to that System of a Down song. Why don't presidents fight the war? Why do they always send the poor? And we see that manipulation. And we can feel it in Perfidious Tides. And the way the book ends, I wanted to kind of mention a little bit about how the book ends and why I wrote it that way, or the way it came out. I go back to, I'm a big Star Wars fan. And I love Empire Strikes Back. That's my favorite Star Wars movie. But the ending, you don't know what's happening. Boba Fett has captured Han Solo. He's frozen to carbonite. Luke loses his hand in the lightsaber duel with Darth Vader. He's wounded. Darth Vader standing there knowing his son is alive. All these questions kind of hang there. And for the moment, the bad guy has won. Or per se bad guy, we know Darth Vader had, like I said before, had that streak in him, had that conscience buried deep down. And the ending of Perfidious Tides, we see the bad guy winning for the moment. Like I said, spoilers. If you don't want to know, go read the book and come back. I won't really talk about the other two books too much in the next few podcasts, but we see the bad guy winning. We see Bert moving in to not only Vern's house with his kids, his nephew, his son, Rolf's wife, or Rolf's girlfriend, excuse me. He's taken over his entire life, not just his home, but his life. And there's Vern. And we leave him kind of hanging there in the air, not knowing his future, not knowing if the electric chair is coming his way. So that was written on purpose like that. And I had one review back this summer, and I've had a couple of reviews but I'll talk about this in just a second. They didn't like the ending. That one review said, I don't like wasting my time on books that don't come to a resolution. I understand that. The other one was like, it doesn't compel me to read book 2 if you don't complete book 1 or something like that. And I'm sitting there thinking, you didn't get it. You just didn't get it. And I suppose those same reviewers didn't like Empire Strikes Back. I mean, maybe I don't know. I hate disappointing people like that, but I also want you to think. And I wrote these books over the course of 3 years. I mean, one right after the other. So it's one complete story. It's not 3 separate stories. It's one complete story. I thought about condensing it all into one book, but I was advised not to do that because that would be too much to read. But my time's about up for this podcast. Like I said, I try to keep it around 20 minutes. I will continue on next time with Perfidious Tides, and we'll get a little bit more into the plot. And I rambled a little bit, and you better get used to that because I'm going to ramble. When I think of something, that's the direction I go in. But next week, I'll continue on this path, and we'll talk about Perfidious Tides. If you have any questions about the book or my thinking while writing the book, or comments, or if you disagree with me about Vietnam, be sure to let me know somehow. Leave comments. I will be glad to get back with you. I try to answer every comment with either a like or a comment back when people choose to leave comments on my videos and my podcasts. So until next week, I hope you have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.